Hey, what's going on, guys? Kalamazi here, and today I wanted to take a little bit of time to talk to you about each of the 4 covenants for Warlocks at this current point in Shadowlands beta. Now, about a month and a half or so ago, we got a decent bit of tuning to Venthyr, a little bit to Kyrian, and a lot to Necrolord that really shuffled things up and changed things from what I talked about in my spec overviews, I guess, for beta. So, I've been getting a lot of questions about, hey, is Kyrian the best? What's going on with Nightfade? Do I have to be a Vulpera Warlock or a Furry Warlock, whatever you want to call it? Is Venthyr still good? And how much damage will I lose playing Necrolord compared to the best Covenant or whatever? So I want to try and answer all those questions today. Now, I will say Sims still aren't really a thing. They aren't really done yet because tuning is still going on. However, so you can't really give like a numerical, okay, this is 5.2% worse than this being 7.8. You can't do that. But I can put it into perspective for you guys by saying this talent works with this ability and this has synergy here and there. And then I can give you my overall, I guess, opinion on which Covenant is best for each spec. Now, any WeakORS profiles or add-ons you guys see here are indeed available to you guys for free on my Twitch. If you want to swing by, grab them, hang out, ask any questions anytime, that is the best way to get a hold of me. So, with that being said, let's get right into this video, starting off with my favorite Covenant, or I guess one of my favorite Covenants, being Venthyr. So, starting off with Venthyr, my favorite, or I guess second favorite Covenant, I haven't really decided at this point what I like more, whether it's Venthyr or Necrolord. We have the impending catastrophe ability. Now, for the most part, boys, here, I'm going to skip over the generic abilities here, the generic ones. We know what they do. They're all good in certain settings, better or worse in others. I'm trying to focus more on the ones that are like different for Warlock, from Monk, from Mage, from Priest, the damage-based ones. The first one here, impending catastrophe. A minute cooldown, 2-second cast. Call forth a cloud of chaotic anima that travels to your target enemy, dealing X shadow damage to enemies in its path. When the anima reaches the target, it explodes, putting up Curse of Weakness or Tongues and dealing X shadow damage over 12 seconds to all nearby enemies. So there are a few things here. There's like travel/impact damage, enemies in its path, and then also the dot that applies. Now, the dot number 1 here is not target capped. It goes on every enemy that it hits, every enemy that's stacked around that one within X yards. I don't know if it shows yards, it doesn't, but around that enemy. Number 2, the curses it puts up are either weakness or tongues. Now, up until about a month ago, or I think like 3 weeks ago, it was putting up a random curse on mobs. It would put, tongues on melee mobs, weakness on casters. I saw it put weakness on a mob mid-greater heal cast like a month ago. It's now smart cursing, so that extra utility is truly relevant in Mythic Plus. You're not going to be putting up, 5, 6, 7, 8 curses on each mob whenever you pull a pack. It's not worth losing all those GCDs. It's not worth it. But having an ability that deals damage, puts a dot up, whether you're playing Affliction or not, and then applies curses, is really strong. It's a 1-minute cooldown, which isn't great with Singularity. However, it's still there. It's still impactful. It's still solid. Now, I will say, this ability was nerfed by a pretty big bit like 3 weeks ago. They nerfed the, I guess, impact damage by like 80% and the dot by like 50, I believe. But the interesting thing is, and I will say, it's a generic ability across the board. It doesn't really change for Aff or Destro or Demo. It does the same thing. But Aff has the most synergy with Catastrophe. So we'll go over here. We'll launch our Catastrophe. Actually, first of all, let's try and cast Rapture. I'll put a skull on this. So we're trying to Rapture here, but you can't Rapture if there's no dots active that will, cause Rapture to deal damage. So we can't Rapture. Let's put up Catastrophe. Rapture. So it counts towards Rapture's damage count, which is really cool. You can see the duration here being 7, 6, 5. Let's Dark Glare. Dark Glare also extends impending catastrophe. So if you have like Agony, Corruption, Vile Taint, UA, and Catastrophe up, it gives you a pretty strong damage profile every minute as Affliction with Raptures rolling. Now, there has been a lot of talk, I put a video out on it recently, about a 1-minute Dark Glare build in Mythic Plus or wherever. This ability is a lot more relevant in Mythic Plus, I feel, than it is on most raid fights, because for the most of the time you're going to be pulling 3, 4, 5 trash or mobs, and 1 or 2 trash packs, and having that dot, those curses active on every single mob, it's relevant. It's impactful. The baseline duration here of the dot is 12 seconds. However, if you end up taking the Catastrophic Origin conduit here, it increases the dot duration essentially by 50%. So you're looking at an 18-second dot on impending catastrophe. It's actually pretty strong. But the really cool thing here, like I mentioned, is with the 1 minute Darkglare build, if you're playing it, one of the conduits we have here being Corrupting Leer, which reduces Darkglare cooldown whenever Agony or UA deal damage. The legendary being Wilfred's, which reduces Darkglare cooldown by, I think it's like 2 seconds whenever you cast a Rapture. And the third one just being Dark Color in itself. If you can get around a 1 minute Darkglare or so, and you're playing Venthyr, every minute or so you're able to have, let's say you're in combat here, you've got some corruptions rolling, you have your Agonies up. All right, cool. My UA's up. Valtain's coming off CD. Let's go Catastrophe. Let's go Vile Taint. Let's go Darkglare. You've got 5 dots on your main target, 4 and everything else, and just start rapturing. And that 1 minute damage profile on your Darkglare syncs really well with your actual impending catastrophe. It's really strong, and the fact that it's an extra dot for Rapture makes it even stronger. So, like, the nerf was there, but the thing is, comparing this to, like, Scouring Tithe, which we'll get to, or Soul Rot in a little bit here as well, it was dealing a decent bit of single target damage. It was probably dealing more than they wanted on one target. But seeing as how this also hits every target, unlike Scouring Tithe or unlike Soul Rot, it probably needed to be nerfed. Now, I'm not saying the nerf was, you know, not excessive, but it probably needed it to a certain extent. Now, the other thing I want to point out here, though, is if you're looking at it in a single target setting, because I get the question a lot, I want to play Venthyr, you know, but if it's not the best Covenant, how much am I hurting myself? Well, I can't tell you because Sims aren't done, but one of the frustrating things here is that Phantom Singularity, being your go-to single target ability, is a 45-second cooldown. IC is a minute, so essentially you're holding your Singularity for your IC every minute or so, which means every third Singularity you cast, you would have essentially gotten a free one. So there is a bit of anti-synergy there. Obviously, if you're close to shard capping and you're waiting on IC coming around, you'll Rapture once or twice, but I don't like how that feels. However, like, when it comes to single target, comparing this to another really good Covenant, it's just too hard to say at this point, but there is a bit of anti-synergy there. That's important to keep in mind. If you're looking at playing like a lot of Mythic Plus as AF and not super interested in raiding, or just, you know, maybe a mix of both but more favoring Mythic Plus, I think Venthyr is still sort of flying under the radar for Affliction. The fourth or fifth dot on everything, the damage it deals, and the 1 minute Darkglare could truly be a thing, but in the end, you have a choice of one Covenant. So it might just be, well, all right, what gives you the best overall across the board? And if that's the case, then with not having any real synergy with Destro and Demo, just being a dot every 1 minute, Venthyr might not be the best look right now. But hey, there's more tuning to come. Let's talk a bit about, well, a more synergistic Covenant. So when it comes to Necrolord for Warlocks, unfortunately it's not as strong as it had looked initially in Alpha and heading into early Beta. About a few weeks ago, three or so weeks ago, there were a handful of sweeping nerfs to Necrolord. Essentially, this ability would deal up to a baseline 200% damage, which you can see in the tooltip here is now 100, and up to a max of 400% damage, which was based off the target's missing health, I suppose. It would deal an extreme amount of damage in Execute, which the abilities it affected varied for each spec. For Destruction, it affected Incinerate, which worked really well with the Fire and Brimstone talent. For Demonology, it affected Shadowbolt, which has now been changed to Demon Bolt. Shadowbolt was removed. And for Affliction, it would affect either Shadowbolt or Drain Soul. Now, Drain Soul also has a handful of really strong damage amplification traits. One being Drain Soul itself, obviously increasing its damage by 100% in Execute. You also had Decimating Bolt increasing by up to 400% at max, I guess, in deep Execute. You had this old conduit here. Now, this has been changed from Prolonged Decimation to Fatal Decimation. Previously, it used to say whenever you cast an ability that would consume a charge of Decimating Bolt, Decimating Bolt came with 3 charges. It would empower the next 3 Drain Souls, the next 3 Shadow Bolts, or the next 3 Incinerates. You had a X% chance not to consume a stack. I believe it was like 10% and a max of 25 or so at max rank. That idea was just completely scrapped. Now, essentially it says Decimating Bolt's missiles deal 50% increased damage. I didn't even know it's shot missiles, but apparently these are missiles? I guess they sort of look like missiles in a sense. But that RNG Decimating Bolts or Decimating, I guess just Prolonged Decimation conduit is gone. I think in the long run it's a good thing, because if we ever ended up playing it, having the ability to chain, 5 buffed Incinerates, or, a few buffed Drain Souls, or 5 or 6 Demon Bolts for Demonology, would end up being pretty OP, and we already had enough, or I guess have enough RNG in the game, I feel, at this point. Anyways, it made it pretty much the best Covenant, hands down, that you wanted for Affliction. It wasn't 3 ticks of a Drain Soul. It was 3 full Drain Souls. It made it our best single target build. We were also the best execute class in the game, and it wasn't even close. A warrior couldn't touch us and execute. We were the best, hands down, no questions asked. Drain Soul was dealing like 75% of our damage within the last 15-ish% of a boss. It was incredible how strong Drain Soul was. So obviously it was going to get nerfed. They nerfed the Drain Soul damage amp from 3 charges of Decimating Bolt to 1, essentially gutting the build by a decent bit, but it was still relatively strong. However, when they brought the huge power squish back out, I suppose, reducing it from 200 to 400 baseline, from 100. The max percentage damage amp you can get here, like at deep execute, I think it's like 170%. They essentially just destroyed Necrolord for Warlocks. It is not, at least for Affliction, but realistically, Destruction and Demo lost a lot of power there as well. Obviously, Drain Soul was pretty OP, but you had a lot of carryover nerfs to Destro and Demo that didn't really need it, honestly. Like, Demo was okay with Necro. It wasn't incredibly OP or anything. Destro was solid. I will say the Fire and Brimstone interaction was a bit OP. Let's just take a look at Destro from Necrolord starting off here, and we'll talk a bit about that. So, essentially what they did to Necrolord with Fire and Brimstone is, I'll take the actual talent here. We have Cataclysm selected, which is perfect. So, look at my actual modifier here. It says the next 3 incinerates are increased by 100%. When I swap to Fire and Brimstone, watch the tooltip change. It's now 40%. This value is reduced while using Fire and Brimstone. So, in addition to squishing the percent from 200 to 100 and the max of 400 to like 160, they decided to hit Fire and Brimstone even more from, I guess, 100 to 40. So, it really gutted the Necrolord Fire and Brimstone build. If you had the option of, for example, like sniping a mob in a pack when it was about to die with Decimating Bolt, and running to the next pack and just launching 3 incinerates, like 3 Fire and Brimstone based incinerates, it dealt a tremendous amount of damage. You can see I'm bursting to a pretty decent bit here, and like I'm not really even doing much. It was really, really strong and gave you that upfront damage that, I mean, Destro doesn't really lack, but when you're playing the Reign of Chaos Roaring Blaze build, most of your damage is more or less set in your Infernal. When you have, you know, Infernal rolling, you start spamming multiple Rain of Fires, getting multiple procs, but it's a full 30-second window, and a good bit of the time in Mythic Plus, wherever you weren't able to get full value out of that window because mobs are dying when you're dropping 5 Infernals on them with 5 Rain of Fires, 10 Rain of Fires, or the tanks cutting out of them and they're dying to other people. Like, you weren't always able to get that full value. So I sort of felt, honestly, that Fire and Brimstone was better in lower keys when mobs are going to die faster, and you were able to, like, you know, snipe that one mob, then carry that massive buff over to the next pack and launch 3 huge Fire and Brimstones, and then follow it up maybe some Rain of Fires or your Infernal carrying over in the next pack. Now, I will say, even with Fire and Brimstone and Necrolord being a thing, the Inferno talent more or less felt like it was your go-to and still sort of is with the Reign of Chaos, Soul Conduit, Wilfred's build. But it's unfortunate just to see this talent getting destroyed. It's a fun talent, but on its own, it's just way too weak. And even with Necrolord buffing it now, I feel that it's just not really where you want to be, especially with Reign of Chaos, Soul Conduit, and Inferno being a thing. When it comes to single target damage, though, let's swap to like a Cataclysm, Roaring Blaze CDF build. You can see it's back to a full 100% buff here. So you still have your next 3 incinerates being buffed. And if I reset the meter here, being real, Roaring Blaze buffs your incinerate damage. And having that 100% damage amp, it's not bad. You can Havoc it. You can do a handful of things with it that you wouldn't, you know, I don't know. I guess maybe this is what I think of. For the most part, like, it gets even more fun when you actually have the triple conflag legendary that allows you to pretty much have a permanent uptime on Roaring Blaze. But it's just a bit unfortunate that it didn't last, or it's just not as strong as it initially was. It made the Roaring Blaze build feel super synergistic and just rewarding casting incinerates, whether it's single target or whether it was AoE. There were plenty of times on stream for raid testing I would end up going into a Havoc window with low shards because I wanted to actually, like, Havoc multiple incinerates because I had a Decimating Bolt damage amp instead. And yeah, we dumped a Chaos Bolter too, but it's just unfortunate. I don't think the nerf was really warranted. I understand that AF was really, really good with it, which we'll get to in a second here, but Destro and Demo didn't really seem that OP at all for Necrolord. Let's take a look at Affliction and talk about why Necrolord probably got nerfed. So we already touched on it a little bit, the Decimating Bolt Drain Soul nerfs for Affliction, but just to reiterate here, I'll take the Nightfall talent here, which gives me Shadow Bolt as my filler. Decimating Bolt says the next 3 Shadow Bolts damage are increased. If I go to Drain Soul, it says the next Drain Soul. So it went from 3 charges of Drain Soul being buffed by Bolt to 1 after they had already nerfed the damage amp of it, after they had already nerfed it once before. So, like, yes, I know that Affliction was really OP with Necrolord, but it just feels like it should have been a targeted nerf to Affliction. Make it 1 charge instead of 3, and not really mess with Demo or Destro a whole lot. Maybe you want to hit the actual execute damage a bit, because a 400% damage amp is pretty strong, like, regardless, whatever ability that you're using. But having it go from, like, 200 to 400, all the way to 100 and a max of, like, 160 or so, it's just too much. It's too excessive. It sort of just put Necrolord in the dirt for Warlocks as a whole. But one of the things about AF, when you had 3 full Drain Soul charges with Necrolord, was that if we open up here, just sort of like, we don't have Dark Light Breaths, whatever. If we open up, like, for the most part, it puts you in a weird spot, because if you weren't able to, like, truly min-max all of your Drain Souls, while also having, like, your Rapture stack set to 3 with your Malefic Wrath Legendary, this is not the right opener, boys, by the way, just 3 stacks here. If it got pushed back, or you had to clip a Drain Soul for a mechanic, or to move, or just whatever happened, it really hurt your damage a lot. So it feels better being at 1 stack in a sense, but the damage nerf twice in conjunction with the stacks being reduced from 3 to 1 just put single target Necrolord in a really weird spot. I will say, Sims sort of had been done initially before the damage nerf came in, and it was still pretty competitive, but the damage nerf just sort of put it into the dirt. I know it's super synergistic with Drain Soul. It feels really good. And in theory, it looks really good with Drain Soul stacking, Malefic Wrath stacking, and the actual buff, but in reality, after all the nerfs, single target Necrolord, even in execute, it's just not as strong as Kyrian. It's just not really where you want to be. It feels synergistic, but there's one more spec that feels even more synergistic as Necrolord. Let's talk about Demonology. So if we're looking for an upside through all the Necrolord changes, I suppose we can say that Demonology actually came out sort of okay. They shifted the Decimating Bolt damage amp from Shadow Bolt to Demon Bolt now. Now the damage amp is still the same. It's still 3 Demon Bolts, but while amp is sort of synergistic, you have a handful of Drain Soul damage amps, you have even more Demon Bolt damage amps for Demonology. 1 being Decimating Bolt, obviously. Number 2 being Balespider's Burning Core. This legendary was changed last week, which is like word for word from the Warlock feedback document that you put out, by the way. The actual raw percent damage was nerfed from 25 to 8%. I believe it was 25 to 8%, but it still stacks to 4 times. However, the buff, you'll see here, the buff is permanent. Previously, in the old form of this legendary, it wasn't, and you get the 4 stacks of Balespider's Burning Core here, you launch a bolt, and it would consume all 4 stacks, which puts you in a really weird spot, because you want to essentially buff all of your, Decimating Bolt, Demon Bolts if you can. A lot of bolts here, boys. So this change is much better, in my opinion. Now, you have Decimating Bolts, you have Balespider's Burning Core. Looking at our talents, though, you have Power Siphon, which gives you 2 Demonic Core charges. Demonic Cores instant cast Demon Bolts, and it increases their damage by 30%. You have From the Shadows, which causes your target to take 20% more Shadow Flame damage. What is Demon Bolt? It's Shadow Flame damage. You have Sack Souls, that increases your Shadow Bolt and Demon Bolt damage by 4% per demon you have summoned. And you even have Soul Conduit or Inner Demons that gives you more demons and a chance to spawn more demons or more shards for more demons. This build is like super, super synergistic. Honestly, if you even want to go really far down the rabbit hole here, you have a Conduit. Let your Dreadstalkers have a chance to Dread Bite again. And if you take Dread Lash from the Shadows, it will AoE their Dread Bite, which will reapply from the Shadows if it procs. Like, this build is super, super synergistic. The problem is, Demonology right now just doesn't really feel very smooth. Like, it feels smooth, but the damage is just, it's just not there. Like, it's really just not. Like, we'll go into our opener here. We have Siphon and actual Decimating Bolt up here. Like, we'll get a Tyrant out, extend here, and we'll go Strength. We'll get some Imps out. We'll go Decimating Bolt. We'll pop Power Siphon. 2 charges. Launch the bolts. We actually have 3 stacks here. We should have 4, but it's fine. Whatever. Like, there's a lot of synergy here, but when you get, like, deeper into your rotation, I mean, Demon Bolts hit pretty hard. Like, they hit pretty hard. We're actually in the middle of our Tyrant right now. They hit pretty hard, and we didn't even have 4 stacks here. The problem is, though, it's just that Demonology as a whole is not as strong single target as Affliction, or quite potentially even Destro at this point, which puts you in a weird spot because Destro is really good at 2-target cleave and actually good at 2-target and council cleave, but Demonology only is good at one thing, being single target, or I guess stack cleave. However, like, you don't really encounter a whole lot of fights like Zakul or, I don't know, random fights where Demo's normally played in most raid settings. We're actually holding Siphon for Decimating Bolt here again. We'll get our stacks rolling a little bit. I'll dump one here. We'll bolt, get our actual amp out, cast dogs, hand it up again for a little more imps, and we can just dump. We actually only got one there because the imps expired, but whatever. Like, what you're looking at here is, like, it's super synergistic. Even playing like subpar here, not really paying a whole lot of attention to our rotation, Demon Bolt's damage is up there. It's 25% of my damage right now. This passive buff is incredibly easy to maintain at max stack. It's a 15-second duration on this thing. It's twice as long as Malefic Wrath. And you're casting Shadow Bolt pretty much at least every 5 or 6 seconds, even with Power Siphon being factored in. It's a super synergistic build. Like, if I'm looking at Necrolord right now, like from best to worst spec-wise, it's probably Demonology, Destro, and then Affliction. If they tweaked Affliction, it could easily jump to 1, but the synergy is there. It's just like, it's not the damage from Necrolord lacking for Demonology. It's honestly just Demonology's damage as a whole. It's lacking. The good thing is, though, like I said, the toolkit is there, the synergy is there, and this is a very different version of Demonology. If they actually ended up buffing this, or buffing Demo as a whole, this build could be pretty competitive. Moving on to Kyrian Warlock, everyone's favorite, the Angel Warlocks. So, Kyrian at this current point in time is one of the strongest choices across the board for Warlock after the Necrolord nerfs and, I mean, Venthyr and Night Fae. We'll get to Night Fae in a little bit. Venthyr is, you know, at the same time, just not the strongest. Kyrian brings a lot of resource generation as well as, like, just raw damage for pretty much every spec you play it in. But the cool thing is, it has extra synergy, extra value for Affliction, Destruction, well, those two pretty much. Demonology is just Demonology. But so the actual conduit for Kyrian that it has here, this is an interesting one. Unlike Venthyr and unlike Necrolord, this one changes based on your spec. You gain X increased damage to your Chaos Bolt for 10 seconds. For Demonology, it's a 10% increase to your demons damage, like your imps and your dogs and your tyrant, I believe, all that stuff, your Felguard, for 10 seconds. And for Affliction, it increases your Rapture damage by 10%. So this is the first conduit we've seen. This is actually the only conduit out of all 4 specs, or I guess Covenants, spoilers ahead, that changes based on your spec. Now, I will say, like, it might be a bit easier to get, like, Rapture value comparatively to Chaos Bolt value, or Demon value is probably pretty easy to get in the first place, but it's still there. It's still an option, and it's not some just generic, yeah, it increases missile damage, or the dot's twice as long, or whatever. It's cool to see. I actually like Soul Tithe, even though I haven't really played with it a whole lot. So the cool thing is, starting off with Destro here, Scouring Tithe is basically a dot you put up. It deals damage instantly, impact damage, and X damage over 18 seconds. Now, the thing here is, if the enemy dies with Scouring Tithe on it, you get 5 soul shards back. So it's sort of like Baleful Invocation for Demonology across the board. If they don't die, if the target lives, Scouring Tithe's cooldown is reset, which is worded oddly. Scouring Tithe resets, you can cast it again. So you'll see it fall in about 12 seconds here. So essentially, it makes Scouring Tithe a permanent dot. These are mastery procs from my Soulbind here. Don't worry about the orbs in the ground. It's essentially a permanent dot. It's going to fall in 3 seconds here, and barring the travel time that it has to refresh, it's always there. So it's a pretty substantial amount of single target damage being a permanent dot, and if the target dies, hey, 5 soul shards means essentially 2 random fires or 2 Chaos Bolt cast and a conflag into a third. Like, it's really powerful. But the cool thing with Destro is that, watch what we can do here. I'll put up my Havoc on this mob. We'll tab this one. We'll cast Scouring Tithe. Scouring Tithe is on both these. Look. You can Havoc Scouring Tithe. And the cool thing here is that if for whatever reason this mob died, I would get 5 soul shards back. But if this one here lived, it would reset the cooldown of Scouring Tithe. So it sort of has like a Baleful Invocation meets Shadow Burn kind of feel to it. It sort of has that Shadow Burn, like, shard sniping kind of feel that we had with Havoc before in like WoD and previous expansions. It's pretty cool and honestly pretty synergistic. It might not seem like it's going to happen a lot, but when we were testing Sun King Salvation in Castle Nathria, I was playing Kyrian. It was like the second or third day that Kyrian was, you know, a better covenant for us. I was playing this character. There were so many times that I'd Havoc a larger ad and then put Tithe on a smaller ad that had like that needed to die, like a priority ad. I get 5 shards, and then it would reset the cooldown 10 seconds later. It's actually really strong. I think it raises the skill cap for Destro on a handful of fights a decent bit. And hey, even if you're in a single target fight playing Destro for whatever reason, it's there. The effect is strong. It's powerful. You're Havocing on most raid fights you're playing Destro. You're Havocing in Venthyr Plus. Shard Gen is important in Venthyr Plus. And those 5 shards, if you can line it up when you're going into your Reign of Chaos window early on, when you don't have as many Infernos rolling, as many Reign of Fires going, those 5 shards are invaluable. Kyrian is a strong choice for Destro. Probably the strongest Destro has at this current point in time. So looking at Affliction for Kyrian and Warlocks, when I said it was synergistic for Destruction, it's even more synergistic for Affliction here. So I'll put up my Scouring Tithe in this target. First of all, let's target this. I'll put a skull on to make it a little easier for you guys to know which one we're targeting. There's a skull on this. Try to cast Rapture. You can't Rapture because you have no dots up. Let's put up Scouring Tithe. Try to Rapture. You can Rapture. Scouring Tithe counts as a dot for Affliction on your main target. Now, you can only put it on one target. You can't Havoc it, but it counts as a dot towards your Rapture count. All right, cool. It's about to fall. You know, we're getting in range here. Let's Dark Lair. Oh, Dark Lair extended it too. So it's able to be extended by your Dark Lair. It's also a dot for Rapture. It's really strong. Like, it's not just strong single target. Obviously, AF gains a lot of value in AoE when you're playing, or I guess, AoE council-based fights. But you're probably more or less going to have one priority-based mob, but you're going to put your UA on, because UA is limited to 1. You'll put your Tithe on it. This gives you even more fixated, like, focused priority damage. It's just strong. It's just really good. And with it being a permanent dot, if the mob doesn't die, you get to put it back up 2 seconds later. It lines up pretty well with your Rapture windows. At certain times, you might have to refresh it in the middle of it, but it's still fine. It's still okay. It still works. Having that 6 dot for essentially most of the fight, with Affliction being like our front runner single target spec, at least for now heading into Nathria, this just gives you so much more value. It's essentially what, 552 shadow damage every Rapture cast, plus the mastery that, you know, is added on to Rapture, like how it affects that. It's just more damage over the course of the entire fight. And if the mob does die, dude, like 5 shards or 5 Raptures is really, really strong. I would honestly say that if there are ad spawning on a fight similar to like the first boss in, let's say, Uldir, Taylock, the random blood spawning, I would put a Scouring Tithe in that for 5 shards into a Rapture, and then when it's back off CD, put it back in the boss. It's really strong. I even think to a certain extent it raises the skill cap of Affliction a bit. It gives you options. It's super versatile. It's universal. It's just a solid ability, even though, well, Angel Warlock is not the most exciting. Let's take a look at Demonology and see what it does there. Well, I did say I would show you every spec for every covenant, so I will show you what it does for Demonology. Basically, well, it doesn't really do a whole lot. So, while it does give you 5 shards back per se and everything else for Demo, it's not like it's in a bad spot. It's just that there's not really a whole lot of synergy with it here for Demonology comparatively to AF and Destro. You can't Havoc it. You don't really care if it's a dot because you're not casting Rapture's Demo. Like, it's more or less just there for single target damage. You can't spread it multiple ways. If you can get 5 shards off it or whatever, that's pretty solid, because that means, like, you know, essentially, what, 1 in 5 imps, however you want to word it, or a dog cast and a hand of Hulan. It's still there. The damage is still solid. It'll reset right now. You can just put it back up. It's fine. And with single target damage being, for the most part, Demo's, like, niche kind of, I guess, thing, it's fine. It's okay. But I feel like synergistically, Necrolord Demo is much more synergistic than Kyrian Demo. But in the end, I mean, like I said, Demo as a whole just seems a bit undertuned single target wise. So there's not a whole lot of synergy here. Like I said, the conduit, if you play it, if you can get 5 shards off of it and get 10% damage amp to all your pets, and also get the 5 shards, yeah, it means something. And it's probably easier to do and more impactful than you know, launching Chaos Bolts as Destro, or, you know, Rapturing as AF. But, like I said, it just feels a bit subpar. But then again, I suppose, like, I suppose every Covenant can't, I don't know, like necessarily... Where is Scouring Tide? There it is. Can't necessarily be the same, as strong as it is for every spec. It's about 4.5% of our damage. Sort of a set it and forget it kind of thing. It is what it is. Demo's still Demo, and Scouring Tide is still your set it and forget it kind of single target dot for Demo. No real synergy there, but it's not terrible. With it being so good for Destro and Aff, chances are high, unless Demonology ends up being like the go-to spec in Nathria, which I doubt it does. If it does, awesome. But if it does, or if it doesn't, you probably just make, you know, the best overall choice being Kyrian's really good for Destro. It's really good for Aff, and it's not bad for Demo. You just rock that. Versus, yeah, Necrolord's great for Demo, but it's not very good for Aff or Destro. You know, probably just going to be Kyrian, and hey, there you go. So rounding out the Covenant talk that we have today, Night Fae. Yeah, Night Fae. Night Fae is technically a thing, and it could potentially be a very real thing, seeing how nerfs, I guess, tune and go over the next few weeks and maybe months, we don't know. Night Fae. So for Warlocks, Night Fae has a universal ability. Well, let's just read this first. It's basically wither away all life force of your current target, up to 3 more targets nearby, causing... It puts a dot on them, basically. It deals damage, and other targets suffer less damage. So your main target takes... The one that you put the actual Soul Rot dot on here takes twice the amount of damage as every other surrounding target. Bam. This dot here will deal twice the amount of damage as it would if it hit these 3 as well. So there's that. For the next 8 seconds... Casting Drain Life will cause your Soul Rot or your Drain Life to also hit all enemies affected by your dot and not cost any mana. So this is the generic universal ability for every spec. I'm not going to go a whole lot in the Destro and Demo here because it essentially does the same thing. Affliction, however. Affliction has the Inevitable Demise talent. Damaging an enemy with your Agony increases the damage of your next Drain Life by 15%, stacking to 50 times. Drain Life. Now, there is a decent bit of synergy here. So, what you can do, and like, this is sort of niche for Affliction, I feel. We'll look at a single target build here in a sec as well for Aff and just show you what it does damage-wise and what it does for Rapture. But if you take the ID talent Mythic Plus, which is going to be interesting in the first place because you're actually playing it over Drain Soul, and seeing as how Drain Soul brings a crazy amount of shard sniping, and just shards, Mythic Plus, more shards, more Raptures, everything else, it puts you in a weird spot. But let's say you're playing ID. You get to your max stack of Drain Life here. You'll dot all your targets up here. And then, alright, cool. It's time to Soul Rot. You'll put up your Soul Rot. There it is. And you'll drain with your max stack here. Big damage coming in. The thing is, once this falls, watch the damage here. The damage is so much worse. It's not even funny. You're dealing 197 damage per tick of Drain Soul. So if you're playing ID with Soul Rot, obviously, yeah, it gives you an insane amount of like spread burst when you cast your Soul Rot, but only for the first Drain Life, or Drain Soul, I'm sorry, Drain Life. For the first Drain Life cast, it gives you a lot of extra damage with the ID buff, but the ID buff only lasts for 1 full Drain Life. It doesn't last for the full 8 seconds of Soul Rot. So outside of that, if you're not playing Inevitable Demise, you don't, as far as I've seen, you don't even hit Drain Life when you cast this ability. All you do is put it up for its dot effect, and you move on with life. You keep casting your Drain Souls, or your Shadow Bolts, or your dots, and that's pretty much it. That just feels really bad to me. I know that it's going to be really tough balancing this with ID being a thing for Aff, and not having any synergy whatsoever with Destro and Demo, but I feel like if they want this to be relevant in Mythic Plus and have it be like an AoE-based ability, you need it to essentially be like, all right, here it is. And it also, in addition to not costing any mana for the actual Drain Life, it needs to empower, like, I don't know, say by like 100% your Drain Life for the next 8 seconds. That could be sort of OP with ID, but look how they nerfed Fire and Brimstone for Demo, because they nerfed it more for Fire and Brimstone comparatively to everything else, or I'm sorry, for Destro, because it was really OP with that one talent. They could nerf it or give you a less of a bonus for Aff comparatively to Destro and Demo, which would probably go a long way in Mythic Plus, because at this point, like, Destro and Demo don't really care much about the Drain Life effect at all. You don't. You're not pressing it for a damage gain. It's a waste of time. When you're looking at it single target, though, I have to say, Soul Rot is only active for 8 seconds. So it's not active for a very, very long period of time. The conduit that it has, though, that Night Fae has for this, it increases Soul Rot's damage by 25 additional %. while it's only active for 8 seconds, your Singularity is active for 15. So it's essentially half the time of that, which gives you less time to Rapture. You can't really squeeze in, 6, 7-ish Raptures in your AF damage window by playing Soul Rot. But if we go into an actual, I guess, a bit of an opener here, we'll keep Dark Caller, it's fine. If we go into a bit of an opener here, let me get my pet out at the same time. Give me a second, boys, hold on. All right, so if you go into our opener here, for the most part, like, our damage breakdown, you'll actually see that it deals a pretty decent bit of our damage. Like, it really does. Oh, by the way, Soul Rot also is extended by your Dark Lair and everything else. So you do get big Rapture damage in for your first Dark Lair window and all that. But once that window falls, similar to how Impending Catastrophe is, it's a 1-minute cooldown. So you're sort of waiting on your Singularity for 15 seconds for your Soul Rot to come back around. But look at the damage it dealt here. It dealt 12% of our damage in our opener, with Raptures being factored in. It dealt more than Singularity. It dealt more than all of our Agonies, Corruption, Siphon Lives did. The damage is there. And the damage is there even more so when you're playing the Conduit, which I'm not playing right now. So, like, pound for pound, this thing hits harder than Impending Catastrophe. It hits harder than Scouring Tithe. But Scouring Tithe gives you overall more damage on average across the board to your Raptures because it's active all the time. Catastrophe is an AoE-based dot that's active for longer and hits more than 4 targets max. It hit up to 20 or it hits whatever. It's not target capped. It hits whatever you want. So each like Covenant, when you're looking at AF or dot damage or whatever, being Kyrian, Night Fae, Necrolord, or Kyrian, Night Fae, and Venthyr, they all have their areas where they're a little better or a little worse. But pound for pound, Night Fae with the Soul Rot ability is the best, just straight up, hey, this deals the most damage. Without factoring in like Rapture damage or uptime, or the Shard gen you might get from Kyrian. It's solid. It's there. But like I said, if you're looking to make it worthwhile in AoE, it needs to empower Drain Life or something, because you're just not even bothering with it. You put your dot up and you move on with life. You don't even cast Drain Life. The ability is cool. Being a Night Fae, in my opinion, is not. I'll do it if I have to. But you're not bothering with the ability. The Drain Life part in Mythic Plus, or really anywhere at this point. It's just not very good. So, with all that being factored in my opinion, at this current point in time, the #1 Covenant for Warlock, I feel, is Kyrian. Now, when I say #1 Covenant, that's a universal Covenant, because we can't swap freely, we can't swap at will, so that's taking into consideration every spec. Kyrian is really good for Destruction, being able to Havoc it, and the Shard generation, the Shard value it gets you, or the permanent dot. For Affliction, having it count towards Rapture's dot damage, being extended by Dark Lair, and giving you the Shards back potentially, and even Demonology. Demonology doesn't have as much synergy with it, but it's still good. So at this current point in time, looking at it from that perspective, I give #1 to Kyrian. #2, whether you want to hear it or not, if you're looking at like a pure damage perspective, as of right now, I think it's probably Night Fae. Now, the dot it has is just strong, especially with the Conduit. That's excluding any kind of weird IDF, Drain Life play with Night Fae. I'm just saying the dot it deals, or the damage the dot deals, is strong. It's there. There are certainly some other Covenants, like Necrolord, that are more synergistic, that are just undertuned. So hopefully those are buffed, because I don't really want to play a Night Fae Warlock. I don't think Kyrian or Night Fae fit Warlock very well. But then again, I'd rather play the best Covenant and not ride the bench in progression. When it comes to #3, honestly, I think it's sort of a toss-up between Necrolord and Venthyr. They're both pretty close. Depending on what spec you look at, Venthyr has more implications. It's better in Mythic Plus or AoE-based settings. Necrolord has, use for Destruction in Demonology, single target. Very synergistic with legendaries and talents and conduits and everything there. The Incinerate buff that it gives to Destro was also a thing for Roaring Blaze, and okay, it was gutted for Affliction, but even if, hey, I guess it favors Drain Soul builds more than, Drain Soul and Shadow Bolt are both single target based for AF. So if you're looking at Mythic Plus, I do feel at this point that Venthyr is probably better than Necrolord. And if you're looking at rating more so, Necro is probably a little better than Venthyr, but they're both sort of down here at the bottom, just depending what you want to do. Like I said though, tuning can still happen, and it's unfortunate for me personally that my 2 favorite Covenants, being Necro and Venthyr, are 3rd and 4th. But it is what it is. Don't blame me. Don't shoot the messenger. I'm just telling you how it is from playing since the very first invite wave of Alpha. Let me know what you guys think of all these, I guess, covenants and what that list does for you guys in the comment section below. Any questions, feel free to drop them down there, and I'll be sure to get back to you. Once again, any weak auras, profiles, or add-ons you see here are indeed available to you for free on my Twitch. If you want to swing by, grab them anytime. Thanks again for watching, dudes. If you want to see more WoW content, be sure to smash the subscribe button below. Hit the like button while you're down there as well. Helps out a lot. Thanks again, my dudes, and I'll catch you all again soon on stream. Peace.